It is Friday, so it's time to answer some questions from our mailbag next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener, of course, welcome in. We love new listeners here on the Locked On Royals channel. And if you want to know a little bit more about me, I work in sports right here in Kansas City. I'm over at Sports Radio 810 WHB. Got a show once a week over there. And I also stay very busy in the producing world pretty much daily. You know, I'm doing this podcast before I have to go in and start doing some producing work, but wanted to get this done because I'm not going to have time to later on in the day. So my life pretty much revolves around sports. So if you ever want to hear my takes on things that may not strictly pertain to the Royals or Major League Baseball, you can find me over there. But when you click on this podcast link, when you come here, you know that you are getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Again, questions and comments are always allowed on YouTube, and you can find me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. Well, we are under a week away from opening day, which will be next Thursday. Royals and Twins, Cole Ragans and Pablo Lopez. And this will be the final Mailbag Friday we do of the offseason. It has been quite a long journey, quite a long run. It hasn't felt like a typical offseason. I think that goes without saying. The Royals have been very busy. They've gone after a lot of different guys. They've overhauled this team, and that's kept me busy for the entire offseason. And even though it's been a little bit clunky at times, you know, this is one of the first weeks I can remember in a while that I got through Monday through Friday with an episode, no connection problems, at least that I'm aware of. Might have some audio issues that I don't know about later on when I post this thing. But this offseason has really been fun to do. And for a lot of teams out there, for a lot of podcast hosts, that probably wasn't the same. You know, when you are covering a team, when you are going over the current events of the team, you hope you have an offseason like the Royals, where there's guys that are being brought in, there's contract extensions, there's downtown stadium talks. But most importantly, it was because days like today or Fridays going back to November, you know, the listeners, the followers, you guys were all active in asking questions. They were thoughtful questions. They were very well-researched questions. And not that I would frown upon or dislike a question that's not as elaborate or anything. I'm just happy that questions were put into the mailbag, because I go back to maybe the first time I did a Mailbag Friday, we only had about 2 or 3 questions in there. There were some days this offseason, in the middle of the offseason, where we'd have about 20 questions to get to. And I have to split it up into 3 segments because I want to give a good response, a reasonable response that can sit well with everybody. I don't want to gloss over that, because if you had the effort to reach out to me, whether it be through direct messaging or just posting on Twitter or posting on YouTube, I want to make sure that I give you the time in this episode to really give you a thought-out answer. So again, for this entire offseason, I thank you guys out there that have really made this easy on me. You know, people can say, I don't know, you come up with content every single day, 30 minutes. Well, it's because the listeners will either comment something or give questions to me that I'm able to roll with and turn into segments. So for that, I thank you. Well, let's not waste any more time and answer some questions, because I know for a lot of you out there that send in questions, you're like, all right, let's move on so that, you know, you can answer the questions that I sent in. And this one starts with Michael. He says, any All-Stars besides Bobby Witt Jr.? I could see Vinny and Michael sneaking in. I think the betting favorite, if I had to put money down, and by the way, go over and do that on FanDuel if you want to place some money down on some future bets. Cole Ragans has to be a guy that can at least make the All-Star roster. Not saying he's going to be the All-Star starter, and I don't believe that to be the case. But I think in terms of popularity, who's going to vote for him, if he has a good first half and a really good first half, I think he's a shoo-in. I think Cole Reagans can really make that jump into being that guy that when you talk about the Royals, when the All-Star game's rolling around, it's Bobby Wood Jr., it's Cole Reagans. That's just a given every single time. I'm curious how many the Royals can sneak in because Salvador Perez has been that automatic bid guy, if you will, for the last handful of years. And what if he bounces back? Does Salvador Perez make it onto the All-Star roster? Maybe not, but he's also been the most decorated player on the Kansas City Royals. So my vote is Reagans. After that, I would say Vinny because I did a podcast episode this offseason. I think Vinny Pasquantino is going to be an all-star, and I still stand by it. If I had to vote 3 guys in, it would be Bobby, it would be Cole Reagans, it would be Vinny. I think those are the 3 guys I would roll with. I could see Salvador Perez sneaking in, but if the Royals are sending 3, for them to send 4 or 5, they probably have to be one of the better teams in the American League, and I don't see that happening at least at the All-Star break, and probably not for the majority of the year. If the Royals do make the playoffs, they are a really good team. We've discussed this a lot, that it's probably a 85 to 88 win team, and that's not going to be one of the best in the American League. That's going to be one of the lesser end playoff teams that we'll see in October. But those are my votes right now. I think Reagans and Vinny Pasquantino. I love Maikel Garcia. Love what he does. I think he's going to have a very bright future in Kansas City, but I don't know if he's there yet. He has a long shot opportunity, but to me, those other guys I listed have a better chance of making the All-Star roster coming up here in a few months. Also with Vinny, got to stay healthy. That is a very big proponent of all of this. RB Carr asks on Twitter, which prospect who is not currently on the 40-man roster do you expect to see make the MLB this year? Great question. Off the top of my head, who's on the 40-man roster? I could see a long shot. Curious if is Javier Vaz on the roster? I don't know if Javier Vaz is on the 40-man roster. I could see him making that jump. I probably could just do some digging real quick and stall for myself here. But the 40-man roster, I don't think has a ton of the top 10 prospects. Because a lot of the top 10 prospects the Royals have aren't even close to the big league level right now. So looking at outfielders here for the Royals, yeah, I'm not seeing Javier Vaz in there. So he would be one of my votes just because he's already dipped his toe in Double-A and he's been really good. So if he continues to hit really well, you could look up at the first half and maybe he's in Triple-A with a chance due to an injury or two to break into Kansas City. So he would be one of my votes. I think for starters or bullpen guys, because that feels like a very, very likely option. Oh, man. Maybe a Noah Cameron. Could Noah Cameron make a jump like that? I mean, the bullpen guys and starters are difficult because you can add somebody to the 40-man roster almost instantly, and they could be in high A. I mean, Carlos Hernandez made the jump from high A to the big leagues, and I know he had a big electric fastball that allowed him to get all the way up to Kansas City and skip Double-A and Triple-A. But to me, it's so tough to tell with pitchers. But for a player, I think I would say Javier Vaz. I think I'd say Javier Vaz. If I was going to go with an infielder, I'm probably going with Caden Wallace. I think Caden Wallace could have a path to the big leagues. I think he is one of the more polished minor league hitters they have. Assuming, like Vaz, he starts hot in Double-A, we could see him in Triple-A as early as the first half. So those would be my 2 votes. Great question there from RB Carr. Steven asked, do you think we see the opening day lineup for today's game with Cole Reagans pitching the last game of spring? I'm going to say no on this. I think we'll see some regulars because I have a hard time believing the regulars are going to play tomorrow, and I have a hard time believing the regulars are going to play on Tuesday when the Royals head to Springdale to take on the Naturals, their Double-A affiliate. I think we're going to see every regulars last chance, but also mixing in a couple of guys that aren't going to make the roster. Because I think that when you get this late in spring training, the last thing you want is any more opportunities for a player to get banged up. Now, I could be wrong here because the Royals are going to be on TV today. Cole Reagans is throwing. Jake Junis is throwing for the Brewers. I could see them saying this is going to be our opening day lineup, and then you package everything up. You send out the alternates tomorrow and go take on the Rangers, leave surprise, and you pretty much send the majority of the alternates to Springdale. Though I do believe some of the regulars are going to play because they're going to sell out that stadium, and it would be great for those down there that don't get a chance to travel up and watch the Royals to see some of those everyday guys play, at least for an inning or two. I was there in Omaha a couple of years back when the Storm Chasers actually beat the Royals, and that was cool for the Royals to put some of their starters out there to begin the game. And then about the second or third inning, all of them hopped on the bus and headed back to Kansas City. So I could see something very similar happening on Tuesday. But as for tonight, I would say 50 to 60% will be regulars in there, and I could see a couple of more guys filling in that are more so reserves. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, we've got 4 more questions to answer from our Mailbag Friday. That's next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give 2 shout-outs to 2 sponsors today, beginning with Ibotta. Ibotta is a free app that gives you the most cash back every time you shop on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies to toys, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibotta user earns $145 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, buy that flight you've been eyeballing, that game you're dying to go to, or the fancy dinner you've been craving. So right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 for just trying Ibotta by using code LOCKEDONMLB when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONMLB. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use code LOCKEDONMLB. We also want to give a shout out today to FanDuel. March Madness, of course, in full swing. I know here locally, a very controversial game last night between Kansas and Samford. But today, we got a full slate of games. So head over to FanDuel and start placing some bets. And you can say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the NCAA tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, and you can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. So it's 10:37. I did this yesterday, saying time that is absolutely irrelevant to those that will be listening this an hour later. But when this posts, you're going to have all games in full swing, but start betting on some of those afternoon games. Start betting on some of those evening games. I won some money last night, and you get a little bit of a high from that. So go create your FanDuel account after listening to this podcast today. Okay, we still got a few more questions to get into on this final Mailbag Friday of the offseason. The Royals and Twins will play next Thursday, so our next Mailbag Friday will be in the beginning of the regular season. We'll be able to really recap what went on in that game from Thursday afternoon, but still a ways away from seeing those questions roll. And I can't wait to see what that Mailbag Friday is going to look like the next time we do this after the Royals have played one game. I can't wait to see the overreactions, good or bad. Okay, this question comes from Aiden. He says, with Alec Marsh getting the 5th starting spot, do you think he'll be better, the same, or worse than Jordan Lyles was last year? Easy for me here. He'll be better. He'll be better simply because I think he's got better stuff to avoid a lot of those outings that Jordan Lyles had. I also think Jordan Lyles is going to be good in the role that he's going to be in, which is long relief for the bullpen. Now, the thing that can get in the way of Alec Marsh and can result in a bad year, not as bad as Jordan Lyles. I mean, we forget Jordan Lyles had the worst year of any starter last year in terms of ERA, home runs allowed. I mean, nothing was good about Jordan Lyles' season other than he saved the bullpen a handful of times by just wearing it. He didn't eat innings. He wore innings, in my opinion. But Alec Marsh does struggle giving up the long ball, and he can lose his command a little bit. And that can concern you, but I think it's more so concerning for a top 3 guy in your rotation. Alec Marsh is the 5th starter. To have a guy with that type of upside, I think is really intriguing and really exciting. So for me, I firmly believe that It's not a high bar, but I think he's going to be much better, not just marginally better. I don't think he's going to have like a 5.88 ERA and just be slightly better than Jordan Lyles. I think that he's going to be somewhere in the 4.8s, the 4.9s, I think, which is very doable and I would say very okay with your number 5 starter. You hope for a lot more at the top half of your rotation, but if you can put up numbers like that, strikeout percentage somewhere between 25 and 30%, your walk rate's down a little bit. I think you can really like what Alec Marsh gives you out of the 5th spot, but I also think Jordan Lyles is going to be much better in long relief out of the bullpen as to where he was in the rotation last year as a number 2 for the Kansas City Royals. This question comes from Matthew. Who would you choose at the DH spot? Velasquez showed great power in a small sample size last year while struggling in spring training, while Prado was yet to put it together in the regular season, but has had a strong spring. Yeah, this is a great question. And we're going to touch on this a little bit in the final segment today, but it is hard to ignore what Nick Prado is doing and ignore what Nelson Velasquez has done and just make your decision based off what happened last year. And I know it sounds hypocritical, and that's me walking back a little bit, but I've seen the Royals operate a different way this spring training. And it's been a learning process for me. I've been trying to understand more and more and how they construct their roster. But I got this feeling that once Jordan Lyles got banged up, that really opened the door for Alec Marsh and Daniel Lynch. And at that point, Alec Marsh ran away with the job. But Matt Quatraro said they came into spring with open competition. And I'd imagine they came into spring with open competition for the DH spot, because even though Nelson Velasquez really burst onto the scene last year for the Royals and Nick Prado wasn't that good for the tail end of the season, this was competition. And Nick Prado has been the best hitter, I think, of any Royal in spring training. So if you're going to say Alec Marsh earned his spot, well, hasn't Nick Prado earned his? I mean, I would like to see Nelson Velasquez in Kansas City as early as possible, but maybe right now, the best action is taking your hottest hitter who won that job and getting Nelson Velasquez more figured out down in Omaha, and he can join the team in a month or so. But right now, I think I'd go with Nick Prado. It's something that I did push away for a while just because I didn't think that his numbers really were going to translate, but he looks different. His swing looks more violent. He's more aggressive with 2 strikes. He's still got to show it in the regular season. It's one thing to hit in spring. It's another thing to hit in the regular season, which Velasquez did last year in the second half. Nick Prado, not so much. And the Royals could look at that as well and say, Nick, you've been great, but we want to see you continue this in AAA before we call you back up to Kansas City. But my vote right now, it's got to be Nick Prado. The power's there. He's been able to cut back on the strikeouts this spring. What that means, it's spring training numbers, but maybe it's also time we figure out if he still has something. I mean, he's only 25 years old. He's still a young piece of your core. If he puts it together, that is huge for the Royals in the future. Next question comes from Matt Vernon. He says, who comes up the 26-man roster for Prado? His spring has been ridiculous. Yeah, I think the easy choice here would be Velasquez, not because Velasquez isn't deserving. It's because if Velasquez doesn't make the opening day roster, I'd like for him to get everyday at-bats in Omaha. I don't want him to sit on the bench. That's what some of the guys like Dairon Blanco or Drew Waters are going to be better for an outfield spot. I think the bench is going to be Freddie Fermin, Garrett Hampson, Adam Frazier, and Dairon Blanco. Those are the 4 picks for me. Nelson Velasquez will be the one that's squeezed off the 26-man roster. This question comes from Bobbert Witt. He says, are you worried about how the bullpen has performed so far? Stratton, Smith, Anderson, etc. No, not at all. I think JJ Picollo said on the broadcast on Wednesday, I believe it was, that Chris Stratton was talking about how many pitches he's thrown this spring training, just working on a lot of different things. Those bullpen guys don't get worried about outings in spring training. I think even more so than the starters. They're only throwing 1 inning, working on some things. No, I think that the most important thing for a lot of those guys, especially ones like Nick Anderson, got to stay healthy. I was hoping they would get through spring training without any serious injuries to the bullpen. They did lose 2 high-velocity guys, or ones that are not going to be there on opening day, and John McMillan and Carlos Hernandez, but they'll be joining the team in no time. As for the rest, I just wanted to see them get through it healthy. That was my biggest takeaway from their relievers in spring training. I thought John Schreiber, though, of all those relievers, looked really good. He gave up a home run on Wednesday, but other than that, He's had some very effective outings, not struggling with command, getting some swing and miss. The bullpen, I feel much better about at the end of spring training than I did last year at the end of the 2023 Royals spring training. And this one actually came in as I was talking. This comes from Marty. Do you think the previous Royals pitching coaches changed Ace Lacy's delivery, and that's why he's been hurt since he was drafted? No, I actually had some conversations down in Surprise with people about his delivery. And they felt like when he came to Kansas City, or at least the vibe I was getting from these conversations, was that his delivery, and this was kind of talked about among scouts and even draft analysts when he was brought in, is that is a very wonky wind up. He's wonky out of the stretch, and it's going to put a lot of stress on his back. So if anything, and I don't know it's 100% for sure, if anything, I think the Royals tried to fix him to avoid any sort of injury like that. But I don't know if it's been drastically changed where that would have been the cause. I think a lot of it is, just unfortunate. It's random. Injuries in baseball is really random. And to me, that's where Asa Lacy's been nipped a little bit, is maybe if you are hurting in your back, you overcompensate with your upper half, therefore putting more stress on your arm, therefore leading to a blown out arm. You never really know. Some of these can be random, but I always was concerned a little bit about that delivery. I think that delivery just wasn't as smooth, and I think anybody could see that. I don't think the Royals did anything to tinker with that led to injuries. If anything, I think they tried to help him smooth things out, but we haven't seen him really pitch in person in 2 years, so I can't really tell you how different that delivery is at this point. Okay, thank you for everybody that sent in questions for the mailbag. The next time we do this, it'll be in the regular season. Thank you for all the content you gave me this off season. Okay, we're going to move on to our final segment and talk about those last roster spots for the Kansas City Royals. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And before we go any further, want to give a shout out to the final sponsor today in Amazon, Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. So it is very easy to set up. You have plenty of opportunities to check out movies, TV shows, sports games. It's endless. Go and get set up with your Amazon Fire TV today. Well, as we wind down spring training, there's 2 games left in Surprise, or at least down in Arizona. And then they're going to have an exhibition game on Tuesday. I'd imagine when the Royals leave on Sunday that this roster is going to be pretty much set. You are going to know who made the roster. At this point, I think there's only 2 spots, I would say, up for grabs. Maybe 3. I'm going to go with 3 spots. I think 23 of the 26 people on the roster have their spots set. To me, the final 3 spots are going to come down to Dairon Blanco or Drew Waters. That would be the final spot on the bench. I think the second spot comes down to the DH, Nelson Velasquez or Nick Pratto. And the third spot, I think, comes down to Matt Sauer or Sam Long or Tyler Duffy or Josh Taylor. Josh Taylor, I think, was reported by Andy Rogers yesterday, is dealing with a little bit of a bicep problem. So I kind of put him 4th on that list. Sam Long is going to give Matt Sauer pretty much every ounce of competition, I think, when making that choice. Sam Long has been really good for the Royals this spring, and Matt Sauer hasn't been bad. He just hasn't been as good as Sam Long. But we also know the hangups with a Rule 5 pick and a minor league non-roster invite guy. You can stash Sam Long, assuming he takes the assignment to AAA Omaha, which I imagine he will, because he knows, being a bullpen arm, that you can come up to Kansas City as early as the first series. Somebody could get banged up, somebody doesn't play that well, and you could find yourself in a major league bullpen immediately again. And he's already put his name into the hat, and I don't think you'd want to leave after having a really good spring training with that said team. You feel like those coaches already know you. The front office is familiar with you. I mean, JJ Picollo brought him up on the broadcast the other night. that alone shows you what they think of him. But the Rule 5 situation may get in the way because if you don't put Matt Sauer on the opening day roster and keep him on there the entire year, he is not going to be in your organization. You're going to have to send him back to the Yankees because that's the way things work in the Rule 5. The DH spot, I almost wonder if their mind's been made up. I'm curious what the lineup's going to look like tonight. I'm curious what the lineup's going to look like tomorrow. Sauer actually will throw tomorrow in the spring training finale against the Rangers at Surprise. But I'm very curious if Prado gets more at-bats or if Velasquez gets more at-bats. I would actually say the one that gets the most at-bats is probably the one that's going to AAA because they're going to want to bubble wrap a lot of the guys that are going to be playing next Thursday and send them back to Kansas City. They don't want them to get banged up. They don't want anything to happen. You want to leave Surprise. You want to leave Springdale on Tuesday without any injury concerns. I'm curious. I'm curious if their decision has already been made. And Nick Prado, I think whether he makes it or not, can walk away going, I couldn't have played better. For Velasquez, there might be a little bit more frustration if he doesn't make it because I think he knows he was capable of much more. But the good thing for him, he is starting to hit a little bit. He's starting to have some of those balls fall in. He's starting to draw walks. But maybe it's too little too late when your competition is hitting 444, multiple home runs, multiple extra base hits, and hitting the ball incredibly hard. I mean, it might be too little too late for a guy like Nelson Velasquez, at least to make the opening day roster. I'd imagine he'll be in Kansas City at some point this year and for an extended period of time, not just a 3-game series guy and then he's back to Omaha. I think that he's going to have some role in this team. But if Prado takes the spot and runs with it, it's going to be harder to imagine where that spot could be. But I am very interested if the Royals have already made their choice on that end because they have really been out there and jumping the gun and really broadcasting everybody out there who made the roster. Like Serpa, after he threw earlier this week, was told he made the team. Like Matt Quatrero went and talked to the media scrum and was like, I know Serpa's making the team. He'll be a multiple inning guy. Boom, you already knew that he was in the bullpen. Then Jordan Lyles gets scratched from his start yesterday. 15, 20 minutes later, we're talking about how Alec Marsh already has the 5 spot and Jordan Lyles is going to the bullpen. So it's been very, very noticeable with how the Royals are handling these final roster situations. It's not leaving it up to speculation. When something happens, you really got to tell what has happened, or you're told what's going to happen really quickly. And that's why I wonder if today or tomorrow, Nick Prado or Nelson Velasquez is going to be the one that's announced by Matt Quatrero. In that last spot, I don't think it's as controversial. It's as debatable. I think Dairon Blanco's got this spot. There was a moment in time this spring where he had a calf injury that I thought was going to open the door for Drew Waters. But Drew Waters started really well in spring. Then you just haven't heard much about him since then. And Dairon Blanco really fits the 4th outfielder role, I think, much better than Waters. I think Waters needs everyday at-bats because there could be a role for him down the road where if Isbell doesn't cut it, or Renfroe doesn't cut it, or Velasquez doesn't cut it, he can be an everyday player in Kansas City. So burying him on the bench does not make too much sense to me. What makes sense to me is putting your second fastest player in the organization behind Bobby Witt Jr. on your bench as a weapon late in games. He's also a good 4th outfielder as a defensive replacement. So to me, Blanco's going to grab that last spot over Drew Waters. But if you disagree with me or any of those takes, you can let me know on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15, or you can let me know on YouTube. All right, that is going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure, again, to follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. Before we say goodbye, one shout-out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV Channels app. You have a great weekend, Kansas City. We'll have plenty of opening day content next week, but until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.